Hello, hello. My name is Belinda. I am an evolutionary astrologer based here in Los Angeles. I love using astrology with my clients to help them find modalities for healing, to understand themselves better, and to realign with their own energies. I'm joined here today by Nicole.
Hey there. So I am Nicole. I am a tarot and ritual guide, and I use those tools to help my clients heal and feel more whole and more directed in their lives.
Amazing. I'm super excited about the series that we have going. It's pretty fresh, and we are delving into a lot of the new moon energies. So we're going to try to keep this relatively consistent if we can. So we'll be releasing these videos once a month to talk about the upcoming new moon. What we have coming up in July is the new moon in Cancer. So some things to note about this new moon. So when we first of all, when we talk about a new moon versus, let's say, a full moon, we're talking about the moon's phases here. The new moon is the time of rest. It's the time of renewal. It's the beginning. And some people like to distinguish the difference between a dark moon and a new moon, and some people like to put the dark moon with the new moon. What's your philosophy there, Nicole?
Oh, I'm totally into the dark moon. I mean, that is Hecate, right? That's her moon. So if you're not familiar with Hecate, she is the goddess of witches. I consider her the goddess of tarot. And that is really her time when the moon is completely dark. Um, and yeah, there's definitely a distinction because I think that most people think the new moon is when we start to see a very little sliver of the moon, but the dark moon is when there's no sign of the moon. It is completely in shadow.
Yeah. So what's happening from an astronomical standpoint with that is the moon and the sun are in the same spot in the sky. So because the moon is closer to us than the sun is, it goes in front of the sun. So that means that the light that's reflected from the moon is behind it. So we can't see the reflection of the moon's light. So it appears to us on Earth as a dark moon. And when we start moving into the moon is moving in the sky so that we can start to see a little bit of the sun's reflection off of the moon. So when we talk about the moon, we talk about her as a receptive energy because she's receiving the sun's light. And we also talk about her as a sort of reflective mirror energy of ourselves because she's also reflecting the light back to us. Is there anything that you'd like to add there, Nicole?
No, I don't think that's a lovely description. I mean, I'll talk about so the moon is represented by the high priestess in the tarot. And I'll talk a little bit more about when we get into that, but she's about the mysteries, right? Sort of like the dark moon, like what we can't see, even though we know it's there. And so she's really sort of the guardian of that, the guide. She leads us into the unconscious mind to help us better understand ourselves, sort of like the moon can, if we allow it, if we allow those moon energies to support us. Um, so yeah, I'll stop there. I'll talk more about her a little later.
Great. Our hope is that as we continue to bring up the new moon, that you start to become more familiar with the specific card represented, High Priestess, and also what the moon's energies could represent in your life. So we'll continue to revisit. We'll add on to this. We'll continue to bring certain themes up with the moon and the High Priestess. So and as it changes from sign to sign, you'll get a chance to see how the moon's energies will start to transform within the different zodiac energies as well. So with that in mind, this new moon in Cancer, Cancer is its domicile, the moon's domicile. What that means is the moon feels most at home in this sign. Okay, it's the most comfortable. It's where she can do her work the most easily. And so with that in mind, there's a lot of things that are being magnified within the symbolism of the moon. So the Cancer energy is oftentimes associated with nurturance. It's associated with the image of the crab. So an animal that can live both in the water and on land and has a protective shell around it. So there's this idea of protection, of being able to go in and out of the water, which is sort of our emotional sphere, right? So it's that connection between the conscious and the unconscious. And all of this is very much reflected within the moon as well. And so with her being in this sign, there's going to be a lot of emotional energy that's incredibly potent during this time. We might feel more inclined to connect deeper with family or familial energy. The Cancer and Moon energy is very much associated with what our sense of security is, and oftentimes that can be family, or that could be home, or that could be emotional, or that could be just your sense of self and identity that maybe not everyone sees. So like we mentioned, Nicole, this idea of the dark moon, there is a time of the month where the moon is not emitting any sort of light or reflecting any sort of light. And so there is a part of within all of us that not everyone's going to be privy to see, or maybe only certain intimate people in our lives are privy to see. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Nicole?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because the Chariot is what represents the sign of Cancer. And the Chariot is really all about coming home to yourself. So I love that you're using this word home for Cancer. So when we look at this card, we can see that the Chariot is at a standstill. It's not going anywhere. It's almost as if they have already arrived. And so this is really all about considering what are the things that take you home to yourself. And I want to point out here that this is the first card in the tarot or in the major arcana where we're not referring to a person. So for instance, we've got the High Priestess refers to the person who's in the card, who is a High Priestess. But this card is not the charioteer, it's the Chariot. So it's really about the structure that takes you, or that the vehicle that gets you where you want to go. And so I like to think of it as, what are the values that take you home to yourself? What are the habits and practices that you do that bring you home to yourself? This is also a card about rebirth. So if you're familiar with the tarot tableau, there's several different ways you can do the tarot tableau, but the one that's most popular has the Chariot at the end of the row. And the cards that are at the end of the row are the cards of rebirth. So often this card is asking us to take a look at what are we ready to let go of so that we can move closer, so that we can create a new vehicle, or a vehicle that takes us closer to ourselves or closer to home. And so we've got the High Priestess here. So as the representation of the moon, she is really asking us or letting us know that there is something that we can look at here. We can look a little deeper at what it is that does make us feel like we're coming home. What are the habits that we do, the values that we have, maybe the people in our lives, maybe the familial relationships. What's working for us, what's supporting us, and what's not. So yeah, that's sort of an overview of how the High Priestess and the Chariot work together.
What came to mind as you were speaking through all of that is thinking about the qualities of the zodiac sign Cancer I think I don't know if I mentioned, it's a water sign. So we have the emotional world happening right there. And then we also have a couple other qualities with Cancer, which is it's a cardinal sign. So when we think about cardinal energy, we're thinking about directional, we're thinking about guidance, right? And so you talking about the vehicle, like what is directing you. I think about what are your guides, and whether that's ancestral, right, or whether that is the sense of guidance that you received while growing up, right, familial or parents,
right,
your own inner guidance in terms of your own values, what is most important to you, right? What really guides you? I think this is a time of reflection to be able to reassess for yourself what is most important for you, what helps contribute to your sense of identity, and are those in alignment for yourself, right?
yeah,
Let me just peek into what that could mean in terms of like reassessing that sort of guidance for yourself. It really thinking and reflecting upon what makes you you, and how do you protect that too? How do you protect this vehicle? How do you protect your own sense of self? How do you maintain that sense of guidance that is always directing you throughout life? And if you're no longer in agreement with that, what would fill its place, right? If
right.
that vehicle is not working for you, go get a new car.
Right, exactly. That is so much of what the Chariot is about. And I kind of want to just bring in this idea of, the High Priestess is all about cycles and knowing that things are always changing. But sometimes when the Chariot comes up in a reading, it's because someone doesn't want to get out of their chariot. They feel very comfortable, they feel very protected, but it's a reminder that the Chariot's not going to take you. It's the Chariot can only take you so far, and then you've got to change vehicles, right? And so, we were talking about earlier how Cancer energy can be a lot about that womb energy, right? And the womb is really the ultimate vehicle, right? You're in there for so long and you grow, but then you got to let go of that vehicle and move on to another vehicle. So it really is about thinking about what is it that's going to carry you to that next phase in your life, or not the next phase in your life, but what's going to bring you closer to feeling like you've arrived into yourself more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like this old car, 200,000 miles on it, it's time to upgrade, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like what is outdated in your in your view of the world and the view of yourself? And can you invest right now in really realigning for yourself, whether that's energetically, whether that's more on an outward sort of perspective for you?
Right.
And going back to like that womb energy and the idea of rebirth, it is Cancer and the moon are also both feminine energies. And whenever we're talking about feminine energy within this context, we're going to be talking about receptive energy. So energy that is coming inward and we are receiving, versus masculine energy, which is not, we're not talking about these genderized, but more so about energy that is directed outwards, that we're pushing out, whether that's like manifesting in a way of getting things done, right? Versus manifesting from a place of reflection, of introspection, and of saying yes to invitations, which is very much of that feminine energy. So thinking about the womb and rebirth and connecting that to the sort of more like receptive energy, how can we bring things inward, kind of have it birthed out in a new way, right?
Yeah.
So the time of reflection, really taking stock of what is happening internally, and then how can we alchemize it in our own way so that now we're creating something completely new. We built a new chariot, right?
Right. Yeah. 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you can even see on the card, you've got these sphinxes. They look like they're tired, they're done, they're facing in different directions. So even if they were to get up, that chariot wouldn't get very far because they're not in alignment. And so, yeah, like you said, it's really a time to reflect and see what in your life is working and what's not, and how you can rearrange some things, maybe bring some things in, let some things go to move forward in your life.
I love that. And that could be internal introspection, or that could literally mean rearranging your home.
Yeah,
That can
exactly.
manifest in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
So, what I'd like to do right now is talk about how this new moon could potentially be interacting with other energies that we might be sensing. There's lots of things that are happening in the sky, lots of other planets that are happening and interacting with other planets as well. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the chart and I'm going to talk about the relationships that this new moon is making with some of the other planets and how the energy is going to kind of color this new moon. So here we go. So as you can see, we have the moon symbol here, and right next to it is the sun symbol. And if you're not familiar with what we're looking at, this is called a wheel, a natal wheel. And so this is specifically a snapshot of the sky at a very specific time. And what we're looking at is specifically the new moon in Cancer and what else is happening in the sky. So we can get a chance to see what's happening with all the other planets. These other symbols that are in black are the planets. And then you can kind of, if you're familiar with the zodiac symbols are out here. And so we get to kind of see the concentration of energies that are happening in the sky. We can kind of see there's a lot happening over here with Cancer and Leo and a little bit in Virgo. And then we can see that there's a little bit more energy happening over here as well. So what I'm specifically going to bring some attention to is what is happening with the moon. So like I mentioned before, during a new moon, the moon is directly in contact with the sun, and it's going to be just separating. So this is the dark moon or the new moon, however you want to talk about this energy. And what else is happening, what else is in conversation with the moon during this time is it's actually making what we like to call an aspect with Uranus, which is over here in Taurus. And so it's having a sextile with Taurus. So a sextile is a fairly nice flowing energy. So Uranus and the moon are having a nice conversation, okay? Which is great because Uranian energy is not always, I wouldn't say there's a positive or negative. It's just, it can be kind of jarring sometimes. And so because they're having a rather friendly conversation, the kind of unexpected energy from Uranus can actually be really beneficial during this time. So the way that they're interacting could manifest itself as maybe a little bit of restlessness, but restlessness in a way that's inquisitive, that's very curious. Maybe you'll be feeling, because this reflection and introspection is happening, perhaps you're feeling, oh, I kind of want to try something new. I want to go out of my comfort zone a little bit. I want to reinvent myself maybe. So that's how the Uranian energy could play a little bit. And let me see. We also have a trine to Neptune. So that is happening over here as well. So Neptune is over here in Pisces, and a trine is also another nice free-flowing energy. So what that means is they're having a really great conversation. So the moon and Neptune having a really great conversation could manifest as perhaps really potent dreams that are happening during this time that could give you a lot of clarity. We're also tapping into some emotional wisdom that's happening. Perhaps you're having some sort of reflections or some sort of clarity on some emotional processing that's happening during this time. You might also feel very tapped into the collective energy, if that is coming through as psychic energy, if that is coming through as just feeling a little bit more aware of the emotional energy around you. So that's what that could potentially manifest as during this time. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole so she can enlighten us with some of the cards during this time.
Yeah, so you were talking about Uranus and how it can have some of this sort of destructive energy. And so the Uranus is represented by the Fool in the tarot, and the Fool is really all about taking risks. And so because they've got this nice aspect to each other, you know, the High Priestess is asking us to look at maybe those things we haven't really taken the time to look at. Maybe it's a little scary or mysterious, we don't understand. So the new moon, as the High Priestess, is asking us to go there, to look at our chariot. Is it still serving us? And the Fool is saying, whatever you're thinking about, go for it. Basically, it's worth the risk, and it's, you know, sometimes it's not so important to overanalyze. The Fool is really about just moving with your instinct and not being afraid to fail, because sometimes failure is a really important part of your journey. Sometimes you're not going to get anywhere unless you take those steps. Even if, as you can see, the Fool looks like he's about to step off a cliff. He might fall down. That's okay. He's going to learn to look next time, to look where he's going. So that's really how we can think about that Uranus energy as well. And then we've also got Neptune. So Neptune is represented by the Hanged Man in the tarot. And the Hanged Man is really kind of an interesting card. You can see, even though he's hanging upside down by one foot, he doesn't seem too disturbed. It's really sort of this sacrifice that he is making to be in alignment. He's got this halo, and so there's this sense that I have to make sacrifices in order to be aligned with who I really am. And so that, you know, that kind of goes along with our theme with the Chariot of the new moon in Cancer, of looking at what is it that we really need in our lives? Are there things that we don't need? Are there things that we can give up because they're not really aligned with who we are right now? And the way that we can do that with the Hanged Man is really just about, you know, he's very still right now. He's not going anywhere. He's very present to this situation. And so that is one thing that the Hanged Man asks us to do, is just become present. However it is that you do that, you don't have to hang from a tree, but actually that is one way that you can really start to become present, is when we start to change our perspective. So if you have a yoga practice, you might consider doing a headstand and thinking about a situation or looking at a situation when you're in a headstand. If you don't have a yoga practice, you can even do this mentally by thinking about, you know, if there's a particular situation, you might think, or if someone else is involved in a situation, try putting yourself in their shoes, like really immersing yourself in their shoes to get that different perspective on the situation.
I really love that. I think everything that's happening right now with the energies are pointing to this idea of kind of reinventing yourself, whatever that could look like on the outside, or whatever sort of internal work that would happen for yourself during that time. I think it's further supported by, we have Venus and Leo going in retrograde. So there's this idea of really coming out anew in lots of ways. So the cards are supporting that, this new moon in Cancer supporting that. And what I want to bring into this space also is some rituals that would really help transmute a lot of this energy and facilitate that, right? So we talked a little bit about this like process of rebirth. And so thinking about what would the new you look like, you know? Some nice energies during this time or rituals during this time could be any sort of water rituals, really connecting to the water element. That could be taking a sacred bath for yourself. That could be floating in a deprivation tank. That would be a great way to kind of just release a lot of energy and start fresh as well. If you are into any sort of divination, connecting with water gazing is really nice. So what that could mean is finding a dark bowl, preferably a black bowl, filling it with water and taking some time to just gaze into the water and see if any sort of reflections literally come up for you.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. We mentioned also tapping into your guides, whether that's familial, whether that's home, internal guides. Ancestral magic is super powerful during this time. So if you have any sort of personal rituals where you're calling in your ancestral guides, that's going to be incredibly potent during this time. Is anything else coming up for you, Nicole?
You know, I just want to go back to that whole getting still and getting present, because I see that particularly with all three of these cards. They're all quite still, even though it is the Chariot. There's no motion going on. And so this is really a time to be still, be with yourself, meditate if that works for you. Maybe it's journaling. But just taking that time to be still and be with yourself, to reflect on these ideas about what it is you want in the next phase of your life, and what is it that's going to help you get there? What's going to take you home to more of who you are?
Yeah, when we're speaking about the dark moon, it is this time of rest specifically, so that you can reflect, so that you can have time for introspection. And it's particularly hard in our day-to-day lives, in the way that we're conditioned and programmed from society. And so even if it's just taking a moment during the day for you to just connect to this new moon energy and just think, okay, I'm going to stop moving. I'm just going to be still. I'm going to be with myself, as uncomfortable as that might be, and just see what comes up. And you'd be surprised what you're telling yourself during those times, right?
Yeah, and I want to go back to what you said. I mean, this idea of dreaming. I mean, if you don't meditate, you can even just sit still and daydream. That can be really helpful right now. And I feel like the Fool would certainly support that. He's dreaming away. He's not using his thinking mind necessarily, but really just dreaming about what's next and how can I get there.
I love that. I just got this image of just soaking up the sun, laying on some grass, and just letting your mind wander for a little bit. I personally, if you can take some nap time during the day, that's always helpful. But if I just take a moment to stop and just rest my eyes, devoid of like meditation, devoid of like actually like the purpose of trying to like fall asleep, just going into what I like to call stasis mode. And just making sure that like you're literally just not moving, you're just conscious of the ground or the furniture, the bed, whatever is underneath you, and just like letting go of your muscles, like how much tightness we hold within our body, and just taking that moment for yourself, because you deserve to just discharge that energy and feel relaxed for even just 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
My cat's saying hi. Okay, so what we'd like to do right now is to get even more specific. So you might be noticing as we're going through these recordings talking about the new moon energy, what we're doing is we're starting from the more general energies. So the new moon in Cancer, talking about its relationships to the other planets. And then we're going to get a little bit more specific, because everyone is not going to feel these energies exactly the same, because we all are different people, right? And so where this new moon is landing within your own personal chart, we each have our own chart, which is our natal chart. It'll be manifesting itself in a different way. So what we're doing for the end of these recordings is we're delving into both Nicole and my chart to just kind of show an example of how it could be different for every single person, even between her and I. So with that in mind, I'm going to pull up Nicole's chart first. My cat is in agreement with that. Here we go. So Nicole's chart. So you can even see already that it is different than the previous chart that I pulled up, which is just the general sky, what is happening in the sky. And so Nicole's chart looks different. This is her natal chart, which are the energies that are imprinted upon her at her birth. And then we're talking about the transits that are happening around it. Okay, so what I'm looking at specifically is the moon over here, the new moon in Cancer that's happening in the sky, and where it's being mapped onto for her chart. So it is specifically over her 12th house. So the new moon in her 12th house could represent a few different things. The 12th house is oftentimes associated with the beyond, with psychic energy, with the dream world, with sort of areas where boundaries are blurred a little bit. So how this could manifest for Nicole is she might be having really potent dreams during this time. I think we talked a little bit about the Neptune earlier that's making contact with the moon. And so it's going to be further bolstered specifically for Nicole, with perhaps feeling really tapped into her own psychic energy, with really being very sensitive to the emotions of those around her, and specifically with the 12th house, perhaps the moon in the 12th house, perhaps being very sensitive to her mother's emotions and very much like intuiting that. So that's what's happening right there. And then in addition, it's making further relationships with planets in her chart. Okay, so what that means is we have a couple sextiles happening right here. So we have a sextile happening to her natal Saturn, and we have a sextile that's happening to her natal Pluto. Okay, so sextiles are aspects that are relatively easygoing, free-flowing. So these are good conversations that they're having with this transiting moon. Okay. How Saturn could be affecting her during this time is it's really grounding her. There's a lot of emotional energy that's happening with the moon in Cancer. And so Saturn coming into this conversation could provide Nicole with a lot of emotional groundedness, with a sense of really having clarity of what's happening during this moment and not acting very rashly. Pluto in this conversation could represent her desire to go really deep and inspect some of these emotions that are coming up. It can be a place for healing for her. It could be, it could manifest as a desire for her to tap into more magic to transmute some of the emotional energy that's coming up for her or those around her. And so ritual and magic will be very cathartic for her during this time.
Excellent. Saturn is represented by the World card in the tarot. And so the World is really about understanding how to thrive and work within your limits. It's understanding you've got a better understanding of who you are because you've figured out to some extent how to make the world work for you or work with you. So I love that as a supportive energy. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of groundedness in the world. There's a lot of getting down to, what's that word? The nuts and bolts of things, figuring out how things work. So that's really interesting to me that this is happening. The new moon is happening in my 12th house. And that I'm getting to the nuts and bolts of it. They're very sort of different energies. So it'll be interesting to see how that manifests. But I love this idea of grounding, and I have certainly been spending a lot of time making sure that I am grounded lately. Um, and then we also mentioned Pluto. So Pluto is represented by the Judgment card in the tarot. And Judgment is really all about waking up to a part of yourself that you may not have even realized was there. So this can also be a sort of a different type of disruptive energy. It's a time where you are, it's almost like you can see in the card, you're waking up from the dead, and it can be jarring, it can be jolting, but it's also like these people are pretty happy because they're realizing more of who they are. And so this is a really supportive energy to go with the new moon in Cancer, the High Priestess in the Chariot. It looks like there's going to be some sort of revelation, as you can see in the card. The one thing I will say about Judgment is it can also be a really vulnerable, it can be pointing to a vulnerable time. Anytime we see naked people in the tarot, they're pretty vulnerable. They are, things can feel really raw and open and exposed. So I'll just have to really pay close attention to that and really work with those grounding energies. And most importantly, I'll have to remember that this is part of my growth and not try and overprotect myself, as you might tend to do if you get a bit of an awakening like this.
I love just the reminders that you're giving yourself, and just understanding the healing that can happen during this time, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we experience, when we go into these transits for everyone, sometimes there might be more difficult energies or more challenging energies, more conflicting or tense energies. And sometimes there might be periods in our life that energy is a little bit more free flowing, that the pressure is a little bit, has been taken off of us a little bit, right? But no matter what phase we are in our lives, it's oftentimes through the tense parts of our lives, the period of time that is most filled with most conflict, filled with the most amount of challenges in our lives, that offers the most amount of growth for us too. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to add, because I think it's interesting, we've been talking about the more supportive aspects, but if Judgment was in a not so supportive aspect, this might be a little bit more rough. Was that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Luckily, Judgment for you is going to be supportive during this time. I think no matter what, Pluto isn't an easy energy, just like the Judgment card is not always an easy energy with its card, right? But we can have an easier time with it when it feels a little bit more supportive, when it doesn't feel so confrontational.
Right. Yeah.
What can happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Great.
I'm gonna move on to my chart and just talk through these things. And I just want to say it is always really difficult to talk about your own chart, because just in general, it's difficult to be unbiased about what's happening for you, right? So
yeah,
it's really amazing that Nicole and I get to have these conversations and bring up both of our charts, because I might talk about some things in the astrology that I might not necessarily have the most insight on just for myself, but having Nicole bring in the cards is going to add a whole nother layer to everything. Okay, so this is my natal chart, and we have the moon over here, just transiting my third house. So the third house is oftentimes associated with siblings. It's associated with short distance travel. So that could be your neighborhood, that could be your city, your state. It is also associated with a space for learning as well. So when you're combining the new moon transiting the third house, how that could manifest is really wanting to get very curious about understanding the emotions, kind of bridging the logic brain, like the right and the left brain. And so really coming into an idea of a clarity of really understanding your emotions and being able to put words to your emotions and being able to talk about your emotions. That's some very third house energy right there. that's happening. And to talk about some of the other relationships that are happening here in my chart, it is making some free-flowing aspects, so trine and sextile to my nodes. So I have my south node over here and my north node over here in Pisces. And so there's this idea that there is some sort of karmic alignment that's happening during this time. And since it is a trine and a sextile with that free-flowing energy, it's going to be supportive to a sense of karmic alignment. Now, because this new moon is also squaring, so I think this is the first time within this session that we're talking about maybe a more challenging aspect or more tense aspect. It's squaring my Jupiter, which is in Aries. And so what that could mean and how that could support this karmic alignment is really just expanding my sense of understanding of my own emotions, of really leaning into the wisdom of that, to feel a sense of greater purpose with my emotions. And that really like appealing to the intellectual level too, with talking, because Jupiter rules Sagittarius. And so leaning into that idea of uncovering the truth, right? And so with it making a square, that means that's going to be more accelerated, maybe a little bit more intense of like really trying to get to the bottom of things.
That's really interesting. So I'm going to start with that square to Jupiter before I talk about the nodes, just because it's what you said, I think was really interesting. There, with the Wheel of Fortune, which represents Jupiter, there is an acceleration. The Wheel of Fortune usually represents fast-moving change. And sort of the lesson or the medicine of the Wheel of Fortune is to let it happen, allow it to happen. This is transforming you deeply. And when we get a little anxious about all the change that's happening, you know, we kind of tend to go to the outer part of the wheel and just like hang on, and everything can be really dizzying when we're on the outer part of the wheel. But if we move towards the center of the wheel, things aren't as dizzying, and we center ourselves more, so we can be more observant of the changes that are happening and allow them to happen, rather than trying to understand it all or trying to control any of it. So from the center, it's really just a place of being centered, allowing and observing what's happening, because that's going to help us. Once that Wheel of Fortune stops, it's going to help us know what we need to do next. So that, and it's really, I mean, the big thing is just about this alchemical sort of transformation that is being accelerated right now. So that's Jupiter, that's squaring you. So it could, as you said, since that's a little bit, it's not as flowing. Is that how you described it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it may feel a little jolting. And so the Wheel of Fortune is asking you to get centered, stay centered as much as you can during this time. And rather than trying to control any of the change that's happening or trying even to understand it, really just watch what's happening, be an observer.
Mm.
Okay. And then you talked about your nodes. And while the nodes aren't represented in the tarot, what they are, the signs that they are in are represented. And so you've got your North Node in Pisces, which is represented by the moon, and the Hermit is represented as Virgo. That's where your South Node is. And so it's kind of interesting because this is a supportive aspect, did you say?
Yeah.
So as you're looking at your chariot, the moon, which is Pisces, your North Node, is really trying to get you to go deeper, right? There's a lot of depth to the moon. We can see we've got this creature from the deep crawling out of the water, out of the emotional waters, bringing that knowledge with him. This can represent ancestral work as well. There's also sort of our wild instinctual nature being represented with the dog and the wolf howling at the moon. And so really allowing yourself to go there, get a little wild, um, go to the places that maybe aren't that comfortable for you. That's really what you're being supported to do right now. And a lot of that is looking at what might be lying in the unconscious waters. Um, so dreams may be a good place for you to look for information as well. And then what's also supporting you, the South Node is in Virgo, is the Hermit. And so the Hermit is kind of used to this stuff. And since that's in your South Node, you're familiar with going within and looking at yourself. And so you've got that supporting you. And so, the Hermit is used to taking the light, going inside and seeing what's going on. But what I also love about the Hermit is that the Hermit takes that light once been in the cave of himself exploring what's going on. He comes back out with that lantern to show the way for others. And so that's a really nice way to think about, this journey that you're going on could someday be really helpful for others.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was so insightful. I really appreciate being able to have your own perspective on this, and it gives me a lot more insight than what I could just provide for myself. So,
oh, you're so welcome. Happy to do it.
What's really cool and what you guys might be able to see as we continue doing this is how different each of our charts are, and how these energies really could be manifesting for either one of us and for all of you too. And we're getting really specific about how all of these energies could be interacting for each individual, which is amazing. So even getting into those nitty gritty like details, and there are some aspects that we didn't talk about within this session too that we just don't have the time to go more in depth with our own transits and our own personal charts. But it's really cool being able to see how the new moon in Cancer and how it's interacting like overall in the world, and then how it's interacting with each one of us. So very amazing.
Yeah.
So I think just to do a little recap of the energies that we might be feeling during this time, magic that you might want to tap into. I think the new moon in Cancer is such a great time for magic in general. And it's going to be really, really potent for you to ritualize, for you to alchemize. And also, it might bring attention to your innermost world, your emotional world. You might feel really tapped into your own emotional wisdom during this time. You might feel very attached to home or your family or your inner sense of security during this time. And it's also bringing up a lot of vulnerability too. You have to be pretty vulnerable to go into these spaces and examine what makes you feel most secure in your life, and to come out as a new energy or a new person, reinventing your own world, your inner world. So just remember to stay grounded during this time. Tap into that magic and see what you can bring out of all of that. It's going to be a very potent time to really be receiving messages that are coming through.
Yeah. And I'll just add that stillness factor, that ability to just sit with yourself, not do anything, maybe just daydream and see what arises rather than trying to think it all out, figure it all out. And I just want to mention, the reason that we started doing these is because we realized sort of earlier in the year that there is a lot going on astrologically right now, and it can be really intense for some of us at different times of the year, depending on how things are landing in your charts. And so that's why we wanted to talk about these energies to support you in going through these transits. And if you are really feeling it and would like to go deeper, feel free to reach out to us. We are doing readings to support people through this, where we're looking at your natal chart and we're looking at the tarot.
Yeah, you're getting a glimpse of what it looks like for us to dig in deeper to someone's transits and how these energies could be affecting you and how you can realign or harvest these energies to really tap into healing and transmuting all of that. And yeah, so we get together and just combining the astrology and tarot is such a unique perspective on everything. And yeah, so if you're having any difficulty, please let us know. July in general, I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of astrological energy that's happening. Not, we're talking about the new moon. I've mentioned Venus going into retrograde. We're having the node shift and change signs. So there's just a lot that's happening. We have a Mercury retrograde at the end of the month too.
We're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah. So if you are feeling the intensity, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help. We're here to be healers and to assist in any way that we can. So yeah. All right. We hope that you have a wonderful new moon. Please let us know how these energies affect you, and enjoy the rest of your July.
Yeah. Thank you.